Hello, comrades. I have called you here to explain the obvious truth, or maybe not so obvious, since clearly there is much confusion surrounding the foundation of our Soviet Republic. Misinformation is being spread throughout our nation by Virginian capitalist pigs, and that will not fly. I must remind all of you how our great workers' state was formed and what we sacrificed to get this far. It took blood, sweat, and tears from the working class, but it has all proven to be worth it. I will tell you how it happened to officially put the Virginian lies to rest. Today we're playing the North America Divided mod, which, as you may have guessed, divides the big nations of North America into a bunch of new countries after they collapsed from the Great Depression. I'm playing as Ohio because I live there and I've spent my whole life there. I figured it would only be right that I play as Ohio. Ohio in 1936 is not exactly a great place to be. Other former US states became democracies with varying levels of stability. Other states, like us, went down a more authoritarian route. Ohio came under the control of a group known as the Ohio Gang. As stupid as the name sounds, they have turned Ohio into an oligarchy. Oligarchies can run with a thin veil of democracy if they're big and strong enough, but Ohio is not that. The oligarchs did start the 3-year plan to make their spending less stupid, but the people can only take so much incompetence. The corruption has ruined Ohio. The people deserve better than this. The Communist Party of Ohio, under the leadership of Alfred Wagenknecht, realized that things would not improve unless they forced change themselves. The CPO began organizing a full-scale plot to overthrow the oligarchs in a manner similar to the Russian Civil War. It seems like Ohio isn't the only place where geopolitics are heating up. Texas went to war with Oklahoma, which then allied with Louisiana to counter Texan aggression. Alaska then revolted against the Soviet occupation. Clearly, these conflicts indicate that the status quo that followed the United States collapse will not last long. To make matters worse, a gang member was caught in a scandal, which made the oligarchical rule even worse. Luckily, we had a plan. First, we secured control over southern Ohio and got the farmers of Ohio on our side. We got the news that Colorado, another oligarchy, was having a civil war due to a miners' revolt. Despite our comrades having control over much of Colorado, the oligarchs somehow won the civil war. We cannot risk failing our own revolution if it's that easy for oligarchs to suppress the working class. We need to be prepared, so we got the unions on our side. Luckily, support for the Communist Party of Ohio was on the rise. Support for our cause was even in the army now, as another gang member was caught in a scandal, this time with using the military budget to fund private parties. We also made sure to raise our own militias to fight the oligarchs' divisions. We had prepared as best as we could, so we finally decided to openly speak against the Ohio gang, denouncing their authoritarian ways. Support for our Communist Party got so high that our supporters acted before us and demanded a referendum on the future of the nation. The oligarchs declined, believing everything would blow over and support for our cause would die down. Spoiler alert, it did not. Things escalated from there, and the oligarchs opened fire on our supporters. This is unacceptable. We staged a coup and officially took control over the government, forming the Ohio Soviet. Now, I wish our seizure of power were that simple. However, we should have known that the oligarchs wouldn't give up that easily. They were quick to respond. They took control over much of the North, thus beginning the Ohioan Civil War. The army was split between the two sides, and our half included some motorized units, which we would use to blitz towards their victory points. The trucks, along with some infantry, managed to reach their victory points. We won the war, but I think I made a mistake somewhere because after doing a focus, a new one started. I think I accidentally used HOI4's Civil War mechanic rather than the one the focus tree wanted me to do, so now there are 2 civil wars. Thankfully, this one was even easier. I just walked back in, and this time, the Ohio Soviet was truly secure. With our revolution secured, I decided to enact autarky. This is admittedly one of my bigger mistakes, but at the time, I believed it was important that the outside world could not leech off our hard work. Either way, the revolution emerged triumphant, and the working class of Ohio was saved from the oligarchs and their authoritarianism. However, the double civil war has caused damage and dissonance in the oligarchs' former territories, which must be fully addressed. Luckily, this wouldn't take too long since damage was minimized. We quickly became one of the more progressive states in the former USA as we fully ended Jim Crow in our state. We also decided to reject the Steel Wars to prevent Michigan and Indiana from exploiting our miners. Ohio Steel is Ohio Steel. It is not to be exploited by foreign capitalists. The Steel Belt is home to most of America's industry. so the liberation of its workers is crucial. However, we need to focus on the economy for now. That doesn't mean we aren't going to help the revolution elsewhere though. Oregon has been in a civil war for a while, so we decided to help Jack Reed's Socialist Republic in its quest to overthrow the capitalist regime. We were making new jobs for the workers of Ohio back home, while our volunteer in Oregon assisted the Oregon Socialists in destroying the capitalist forces. With our help, the capitalists of Oregon lost so many divisions that they couldn't stop the communist revolution, ending the war in a victory for the Oregon Socialists. Oregon will never forget what we did for them, and that will show later on. We've recovered from the Civil War, so we can now officially enact the first 5-year plan as a replacement for the failed 3-year plan put forward by the oligarchs. A strong economy will support a strong army. So that being said, we can officially begin moving towards spreading the workers' revolution through the Steel Belt. Before we can expand, we have to answer the question of what to do with the liberated territories. Obviously, they will come under our supervision once the capitalist and totalitarian governments are defeated, but in what form? The Great Lakes SSR plan outlines a steel belt ruled by a collective government of the working class. But then that begs the question, would it be a group of highly autonomous republics? Or would it be an American USSR? That'll have to be answered later. For now, we turn our attention towards Indiana. They are run by the Ku Klux Klan, so I think it goes without saying that they desperately need our liberation. We were getting ready to declare war on Indiana, but there was a problem. Indiana had a guarantee of independence from Kentucky. This just meant we needed to prepare more. I got 24 new divisions in training to hold the line against Kentucky while I focus on Indiana. However, it would appear Kentucky had a really itchy trigger finger because they declared war on me first. Honestly, Kentucky's army was pretty bad. It was just infantry and no support companies. The problem is that because they declared war on me now, I couldn't do my military focuses in time. So now I have multiple permanent debuffs that I can't get rid of no matter what. Because of those debuffs and Kentucky constantly using the last stand and force attack commands, we couldn't advance. Our units were much better, but Kentucky was able to stop me from advancing because of poor supply and the aforementioned the last stand and force attack. Now and then I would attempt to push, but they would use their stockpiled command power to use those commands again. I had to wait around for the gun deficit to go away. After a while, I finally broke through and captured a supply hub on the border. I utilized this breakthrough to reach their capital. Turns out, Kentucky's supply lines are not that great because this one move had destroyed Kentucky's eastern supply routes. I used this to get a bunch of encirclements and got one big one. While I was clearing it out, Kentucky did one more last stand. After it was cleared, the road ahead was also clear. We stormed through the rest of Kentucky and forced them to surrender. We don't have cores on Kentucky yet, so we turned it into a supervised communist state. With Kentucky handled, we moved back to Indiana. However, Minnesota declared war on Oregon and I for some reason. I don't know why they did. Neither of us borders them. Either way, it didn't make much difference. I had to re-justify on Indiana because of Kentucky's stubbornness. Since it made the war go on for so long, I lost a war goal. Luckily, I had a claim to Indiana's land, so that didn't take too long. I declared war, and this time we got some easy encirclements pretty quickly. Indiana was pretty weak. We didn't even need to encircle their capital to take it. We launched a big offensive and wiped out Indiana. We established a puppet government, but with substantial control over its industry. Later, it became an integrated puppet state. The next state due for liberation was Michigan. However, they were much stronger than I was expecting. Not too much stronger, but still strong enough to hold me back for a moment. It was at this time that I decided to form my own faction, the American Internationale. Because Minnesota declared war on both Oregon and I could add Oregon to the faction. An ally on the other side of the country won't help much though. We need some armor. That's why I deployed light tanks, but with infantry and not motorized. After declaring war, I had hope that the light tanks would perform, but yet again, I was disappointed. They didn't work in the Equestria at War video, and they didn't work here. They were probably even less effective than my simpler infantry actually. I still managed to get a decent encirclement early on, but soon the front line stalemated. To make matters worse, Minnesota was able to use its ports in Wisconsin to invade us. Their invasions were easy to put down, but still annoying. I was able to get a good breakthrough in Michigan, but Minnesota invaded the port supplying my units, so I had to pause the attack. Luckily, I was still able to launch an attack on Lansing and got an encirclement around it. By now, most of Michigan's capable forces were destroyed, so one last offensive was all we needed. Michigan surrendered, and in the peace deal, we gave most of Michigan the Indiana treatment, but gave autonomy to Detroit. We wanted to liberate the workers of Detroit, but that ended up being a massive mistake for us. You'll see why later. Anyway, remember how we had begun working on the Great Lakes SSR plan? and whether it would be a group of highly autonomous republics or an American Soviet Union, well, I now had my answer. While the first option means more freedom for each republic, the problem is that we have already lost a lot of manpower because of these invasions. The only way to get more is to form an American version of the Soviet Union. As such, Indiana and Michigan would be directly annexed, but we would have to work towards annexing Detroit a bit more. Since we defeated Michigan, we now had a border with Minnesota, which had occupied Wisconsin at some point. We made some early gains, but they managed to put up a strong defense, so we had to pause. I began training more units since we could afford them with the newly integrated industry and populace of Michigan and Indiana. Minnesota must be using the Kentucky Doctrine because it frequently uses the force attack ability. However, a constant force attack can't win you the war. A strong industry capable of supporting a strong army can. That's why we started the second 5-year plan to make our economy even bigger. A strong economy definitely comes in handy to cover up your blunders, because I think I got 20 of my units encircled after doing an ambitious offensive with poor supply routes. I pulled back a bit and was able to start getting pockets again. I launched an attack towards a more northern supply hub and captured it, but then noticed that Minnesota now had a massive hole in its front line, so I took advantage of it and took Minneapolis without a fight. I took further advantage of it, and soon half of their country was occupied and tons of their units were lost. You wanna know why releasing Detroit separately was dumb? Because Nazi New England began justifying on it at some point for whatever reason, but now we were actually at war over it. Luckily, we don't have a land border, so I just need to keep repelling naval invasions. Thankfully, that was pretty easy since Minnesota had no shot of stopping me, now that their heartland is occupied. One last offensive was all I needed to finally put them down. With the proletariat of Minnesota and Wisconsin liberated, we quickly switched to a defensive stance. This is because we couldn't do anything to fight New England aside from repelling constant naval invasions. Also, New England is insanely strong. They have tons of industry and manpower that we currently do not have. An easy source of new manpower was simply the deletion of the light tank divisions because they were expensive, ineffective pieces of junk. To reduce the manpower problem, I decided to release Minnesota as a supervised government. Didn't help much. Another major problem was that Pennsylvania, an oligarchy much like Ohio used to be, had a wargle on us. It looked like they wouldn't use it since they are at war with the Jeffersonian League, but it was still very worrying. We finally annexed Detroit, which did help with manpower a bit, but we were still struggling. However, there was a solution. The Ohio Soviet has direct control over a lot of land, but Ohio is only one republic in our union. We needed a proper name. We needed a reason for our people to support our occupation. Luckily, we had one. We would declare our government as the legitimate successor to the United States of America, transforming our nation into United American Soviet Republics. Side note, why is the communist Ohio flag in this mod literally just Cuba but ugly? Ohio has one of the most unique flags in the United States, yet the developers chose Cuba but bad. It's so bad I decided to ask my friend to design a proper communist Ohio flag. He's damn good at flag design, so it came out looking pretty damn good. It's also the flag above me, so applaud Comrade Searcher. Now that we've declared our nation to be a successor of the United States, we have gained cores on all of the US. This means investing in our Kentucky and Minnesota puppet states allows them to be integrated into our union, giving us full access to their resources. Just then, New England conducted an actually a highly threatening naval invasion. They put a lot of effort into it, but we managed to crush the invading forces. New England has been hit with 1 million casualties just from failed landings alone, by the way. Minnesota was easier to integrate than I thought it would be. Pretty quickly, I was able to turn them into an integrated puppet. After New England failed to invade Cleveland, Minnesota was ready to become a republic in our union. This was better than I was hoping, as Minnesota had a lot of much needed resources that we would need. They provided so much stuff that we could actually afford to bulk up our divisions to make them stronger. I could also afford to produce more planes. Did I mention I was making planes? Well, I am. You know it's serious when I am making planes. I also designed a proper medium tank and partially designed a tank template, but didn't train any at first because I needed to research some more support companies. Kentucky was then ready for partial integration, and soon after was fully integrated into the Union. While we were on the defense, we had plenty of time to build up the armed forces. This meant we could not just finish designing our tank divisions, but deploy a bunch of them too. We were also deploying more infantry to prepare for the inevitable war with Pennsylvania. Now, one thing I actually had to consider was whether I wanted to fight Pennsylvania at all. Pennsylvania had a stupid amount of units, and would be pretty tough. Furthermore, if I beat them, then that would open a front with the even stronger New England. I tried to fight Pennsylvania, but it was really late, and it looked like the war would go nowhere. So at the time, I thought the campaign would end here. However, one person changed that, and it was Hansen of all people actually. I was showing the first concept of this video's thumbnail to this server for Paradox creators, and Hansen suggested centering the thumbnail around Ohio, rather than the Midwest. My problem with this suggestion was that my expansion in the campaign up to this point was purely westward. So if how I designed the thumbnail, it would look super off. I'd have to start from scratch if I wanted to keep using this approach. So I figured it would be a good idea to at least try to expand eastward, so the expansion could be viewed both east and west, and thus look good with Ohio centered. This actually ended up not mattering, but I'm glad I did it anyway. I was very doubtful this would actually work though. As such, I didn't write any notes for this segment. I remember utilizing bombers a lot to try to hurt their supply and hitting them with my tanks, but even then, it took a long time to get a breakthrough. I also developed paratroopers with the purpose of using them to paradrop on the enemy supply hubs and railways to destroy their supply, so offensives could be made possible. It was a lot of that for both Pennsylvania and New England. If anything happened, I don't remember it because I didn't write it down for reasons I've already stated. So to make this interesting, I'm going to use a trick I used in my Collapsing World California video. I played the William Tell Overture while I reunited America because the conquests all went roughly the same. I'm obviously going to use a different track here, but I think it fits. It is time to overthrow the oligarchs of Pennsylvania and the Nazi fucks in Boston. Comrades, it is time to march forward!
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo der Platz genossen. Weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo der Platz genossen ist, weil dich ein Ideal weiter einreizt und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil dich kein Ideal weiter einreizt und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Alas, we have defeated our adversaries, and the United American Soviet Republics is once more in a state of peace. We have practically doubled our industry and manpower reserves, and doubled the size of our union. While we could go back on the move and take over more of America to further raise our legitimacy as the successor of the United States, this is simply not in our best interest at the moment. Ohio has been in a constant state of war since the Communist Coup and First Ohioan Civil War. Our manpower reserves went dry multiple times. Probably 1 million Americans have perished in these wars. If the United American Soviet Republics is to secure public support and be ready for more reunification wars, then we need to return to peace and build something that people can support. The Workers' Revolution will be brought to all of America one day, but for now, it's time to rest. That is all I have to tell you today, comrades. Hopefully now, the Virginians will stop spreading misinformation and damaging our image. We are the liberators of the Steel Belt in the Northeast, and our union will expand to all of America one day. We and our friends in the Socialist Republic of Oregon are the liberators of the American working class, and there is nothing that can change this.